The tornado took her wagon train and left her in a ditch. A Lakota chief lifted her out. The first thing I heard was the sky turning. Not wind, not thunder. The sky itself, a low, grinding moan like the earth was pulling a breath it couldn't hold. I had heard that sound once before when I was maybe 14 summers, and my father pulled me flat into the grass and put his hand on my back and did not lift it until the sound stopped. That time I did not look up. That time I obeyed. This time I was standing on the ridge above the creek bend with Tatanka Ska beside me, watching the western plain. We had come to look for the pony herd, 3 mares who'd wandered south in the night. Tatanka Ska saw it first. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed the back of my robe at the shoulder, and I looked where he was looking, and the sky was green. Not the green of summer grass. Not the green of shallow river water over sand. A green that has no name in any language I know. A sick, bruised green, the color of something that should not be. The funnel was already down, already moving, already eating the plain in front of it with that roaring that is not sound, that is instead the absence of all other sound, the world going quiet except for one terrible voice. We rode hard north and east back to the village. We got everyone into the low ground along the creek under the cutbank. Horses were mad with it. Children cried. Old Maka Oda, who had seen more seasons than any of us could count, sat in the grass and looked toward the sound with something on her face that was not fear but was something older than fear. Acknowledgement, maybe. Recognition. It passed south of us, maybe 2 miles south, maybe less. When the sky came back to itself, that slow, apologetic lightning, the air smelling of torn grass and wet soil, and something electric that sits in your teeth, I rode out to see what it had done. I found her before I found the wagons. She was in a ditch at the base of a shallow draw, not a ditch someone had dug. A ditch the water had made over years, cutting down through red clay and pale stone, and she was lying in the bottom of it face down in maybe 4 inches of runoff water, and her right arm was twisted back in a way that arms do not twist back on living people. I thought she was dead. I got down from my horse. She wasn't dead, she was breathing. I could see it in her back, that slight stubborn rise and fall that the body keeps doing even when it doesn't know why anymore. I waded in, the water was cold, not deep, moving slow, and I put my hand on her shoulder and turned her face out of the water, and she made a sound. Not a word, not a cry, a sound. Her hair was the color of creek mud. Her face was cut, 3 places, the cuts already clotting in the cold air. She was maybe 30 years old, maybe a little less. Hard to say. The kind of woman that weather marks early. She had boots on that were not meant for this country, too thin, no height to the heel for stirrup work, women's boots for walking a street somewhere. Her dress was homespun, dark blue, and it had been torn so badly along the left side that I could see she was not much hurt there despite how it looked. A bruise, maybe. The arm was the problem. I looked at the arm. I had set bones before. I had held men down while the medicine man worked their legs, their shoulders, the things that horses and falls and other men had broken. I knew what a dislocated shoulder looked like, and I knew what it needed. It needed someone to do it now, before the muscles locked down on it, before the pain woke her fully and made her fight. I did it. I will not pretend she didn't scream. She screamed. It woke a flock of blackbirds out of the draw grass 50 yards away, and they scattered into the gray sky like thrown ash. But the shoulder went back. I felt it go. And she went slack again immediately. The pain spiked and she dropped back under, which was a mercy. I looked for the wagons. There were 3 of them, or had been. One was simply gone. I found pieces of it a 1/4 mile east. Boards and iron rims and someone's cookstove in 4 pieces distributed across maybe 200 yards of grass. The second wagon had rolled and broken apart against a shallow ridge, its canvas cover somehow intact and sitting in the grass beside it like a discarded coat. The third had been lifted and set down mostly whole maybe 80 yards from where it had been, but tilted hard on its side, One wheel gone entirely, the oxen that had pulled it dead and tangled in their traces. 6 people. That was what I found. 6 people in the grass in the draw, and once, God help me, in the branches of a cottonwood that the storm had uprooted and carried and set down on its side near the creek. 4 of them were dead. One of them, a boy, maybe 12, maybe 13, was alive and not badly hurt, just stunned and sitting in the grass holding his own head in his hands like he was afraid it would come apart. And her. The boy's name was Cormac. I didn't know that yet. I went back to the woman first. I lifted her out of the ditch. She wasn't a small woman, but she was not heavy either, the kind of not heavy that means someone has not had enough to eat for a while, and I carried her to the intact canvas and laid her on it. The boy had found me by then, walking like a man on a pitching boat, and he stood looking at her. He said something, English. I had some English by then enough. He said, "Is she alive?" I said yes. He said those were my parents and my aunt and my 2 cousins. I looked at the dead and then back at him, and I did not say anything because there was nothing to say. He sat down in the grass next to the woman and put his hand on her leg, just above her knee, the way a child reaches for something solid without thinking about it, and he looked at me with those gray eyes that Irish people have, that pale gray that seems like it ought to be cold but isn't. He said, "Who are you?" I told him my name. Chante Chikala, that's what my people call me, but even then I knew most white people couldn't carry it. I said he could call me something easier if he needed. He just kept looking at me. He said, "Are you going to hurt us?" I said no. I said I was going to take them back to my village. He said she won't like waking up there. I said probably not. But she's going to wake up somewhere, and I'd rather it be somewhere there's warmth and water and a woman who knows medicine. If she doesn't like it, she can say so then. The boy thought about this. He had his father's eyes, I would find out later. He had his mother's stubbornness, which I was beginning to understand was something particular to that family, and probably to that country they came from, wherever it was. He nodded. He said, "All right." So I went back to the village with 2 white people, and the knowledge that there were 4 dead ones I would have to do something about, and my 3 mares were still somewhere south, and the storm had knocked over the drying racks and scattered a season's worth of jerked meat into the grass, and Tatanka Ska's wife was going to remind me of this for the rest of the year at minimum. He was right, she didn't like waking up there. Her name was Bridget Combe. She woke up on the 2nd day, and the first thing she did was push herself upright with one arm, the good arm, and look around the lodge with the kind of look that is not panic but is what comes just before panic, the look that is still deciding. Two Hawk's wife, Weste Win, was there. She had been tending the fire, and she looked at Bridget without expression and said something in Lakota that meant more or less. "You're alive, stop moving, your shoulder needs more time." Bridget did not understand the words, but she understood the tone, which is a thing that tone carries across any language if the woman using it means it. She stopped moving. Her eyes found me. I was sitting at the other side of the fire, across from Weste Win. I had been there most of the night and into the morning. Not for any great noble reason. There was simply nowhere pressing to be, and I had wanted to see if she was going to live. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "What happened to my wagon?" I said, "The storm took it." She said, "I know the storm took it. I mean what's left of it." I said, "Not much." She took that in. She looked at the lodge walls, the painted hides, the smoke hole above with the gray sky in it. She looked at her right arm, which Weste Win had bound across her chest with a soft hide strap to keep the shoulder still. She said, "Where's Cormac?" I said he was fine. I said he was outside helping with the horses. The boy had, in fact, appointed himself assistant to our horse handler without being asked, and our horse handler, an old man named Shungmanidu Thanka, who was not patient with anyone, had taken one look at the boy and apparently decided he was acceptable, which was more than he'd decided about most adults. She said, "Can I see him?" I said yes. She said, "What do I call you?" I told her my name. She tried it. She had the sounds mostly right, which surprised me. I said she could call me Thomas if that was easier. I had taken that name some years earlier when I'd spent a winter with a missionary's family learning the English that would eventually be useful, and I had kept it in the way you keep a tool, not the way you keep something important. She said, "I'll call you what you're called." I said it again, slower. She tried again. She had it better the second time. She said, "Is that what it means? What it means in English?" I said it means something like small-hearted, which is not quite right but close enough. It had been given to me when I was young, when I had been afraid of something I should not have been afraid of, and I had kept it the way a man keeps a scar because it reminds him. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "That seems like a hard name to carry." I said, "Most names worth carrying are." She closed her eyes. She was still pale, still cut across the face, the scabs dark and new, but the breathing was different, settled. Whatever she was deciding had been decided. She stayed 4 days before she started telling me she should leave. I knew it was coming. I had watched it build in her, the way she moved around the camp, helping where she could without being asked, learning words with that quick, stubborn application she put to everything. She was not a woman who stayed still. She was not a woman who accepted charity without needing to balance it somehow, and she could feel herself accumulating a debt she didn't know how to repay. I had seen that kind of pride before. I respected it mostly. It made life harder, but it made the person reliable. She came to me on the 4th morning. I was working on a bridle that needed rebraiding. The rawhide had gone stiff and cracked over the winter, and I'd been putting it off, and she stood in front of me until I looked up. She said there's a settlement she had heard, maybe a day and a half to the southeast, Fort something. She said she thought she and Cormac could make it if you give us a horse. I said I wasn't going to give her a horse. The look on her face, Lord. I said, "I'm not giving you a horse, because I'm not sending you southeast with a 12-year-old and one good arm." I said, "There's 3 men at that fort who have been trying to buy horses from me for 2 years who I don't trust, and I can tell you right now they're not going to treat a woman who arrives alone any better than they treat an inconvenient land deal." She said, "I didn't ask your opinion about where I go." I said, "No, but you asked for a horse, and I'm explaining why the answer is no." She stood there. I said, "When your shoulder is right, and there's someone going that direction who I trust, I'll see you to wherever you're trying to get to. In the meantime, you're not a prisoner and you're not a guest exactly. You're just here, and here is not the worst place to be." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Not the worst place." I said, "I've seen worse." She sat down across from me. Not because she was agreeing, I understood that. Because she was thinking and she thought better sitting. She watched me work the rawhide for a while. She said, "Where was your people's land before they pushed you here?" I told her. I told her about the Black Hills, about Pahasapa, what it was, what it meant. I told her about the treaties that meant what the men signing them wanted them to mean and nothing more. She listened to all of it without interrupting, which was not nothing. Then she said my family came from a place that wasn't theirs anymore either. She said when the land is gone out from under you, you find out what you're made of. I said yes. She said, "What are you made of?" I looked at her. I said, "Whatever it takes." She nodded. She looked out at the camp, at the lodges, at old Shungmanidu Thanka chasing Cormac away from a mare who did not want to be approached from the left side, which Cormac had apparently not understood and apparently needed to understand again. She said, "The boy's my cousin's son. His parents are dead now." She said it flat, the way you say a fact you've already done your crying about. I said, "I know." She said, "I don't have much to take him to. Whatever was in those wagons is gone." She paused. She said I had enough coming to start something. Not a lot. Enough. I didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. She said, I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know the situation so you understand that I'm not a fool who walks into a storm. We were in it before we knew it was there. I said, I know that too. She looked at me. That gray look, direct, no particular softness in it but no hardness either, just clear. She said, you don't waste many words, do you? I said, not usually. She almost smiled, almost. Her shoulder took another 3 weeks to be right enough. I know she pushed it faster than Wagon wanted, did exercises with it in the evening when she thought no one was watching, wincing through the last range of motion. She helped with the cooking when they'd let her, which at first they wouldn't. There is a way things are done and a way things are not done. And a stranger walking into someone's kitchen and picking up their tools is the same the world over. But Wagon was a practical woman, and eventually practical women accept help that's offered with the right spirit. Bridget had the right spirit. Irritating, but right. Cormac learned Lakota faster than she did. Children do. He was trailing after Shungmanidu Thenka everywhere within the first week, and the old man had begun teaching him things. How to read a horse's weight shift before a kick. How to tie a knot that doesn't slide with the same brusque completeness he used with our own young men. That was its own kind of acceptance, and I think Bridget saw it and was glad, though she didn't say so. I watched her. I'm not ashamed of that. I watch everything. A chief who doesn't watch is a chief who is surprised, and a chief who is surprised is a chief whose people suffer for it. But I watched her with more attention than the situation required. She had a way of being still when she was thinking that was different from most people's stillness. Most people fidget in the pauses, touch something, shift their weight. She went quiet all the way down, like she was saving the energy for when she needed it. And then when she moved or spoke, it was deliberate, every bit of it. No wasted motion. No wasted words, despite what she'd implied about me. One evening near the end of the 3rd week, I was sitting outside the lodge watching the fire my nephew had built for the night, and she came and sat next to me. Not across from me, next to me. Maybe 3 feet. She had a piece of rawhide in her hands, some small mending she'd taken on, and she worked it in the firelight without speaking. After a while she said, my husband died 2 years ago. She said it the same way she'd said the thing about Cormac's parents, factually, offering information, not inviting comfort. I said, I'm sorry. She said we were going west to start over, she and the family. She said he would have liked that, you know how to work a bridle. He was that kind of man, noticed that kind of thing. I didn't say anything. I let that sit between us the way it wanted to sit. She said, what about you? Do you have a wife? I said I did. I said she died 3 winters ago. Sickness, the kind that came through that year and did not ask permission and did not make exceptions. Bridget was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm sorry. I said, thank you. She kept working the rawhide. The fire cracked. Somewhere in the camp a child was laughing, one long, helpless, tumbling laugh, the kind children make when they've been caught being ridiculous. She said, do you ever feel like, she stopped. She started again. She said, do you ever feel like you're just carrying it, all of it, and people look to you to carry it, so you do, but at the end of the day there's nobody to set it down with. I looked at the fire. I said, yes. She said, yes. Just that, yes. I don't know how long we sat there. It was a while. The fire got lower. The child's laughing had stopped, and the camp had gone to that nighttime quiet that has its own particular weight, a contented weight, the sound of people who are safe enough to sleep. At some point I became aware that she had stopped working the rawhide, and it was lying in her lap, and she had her eyes up, looking at the same piece of sky I was looking at. She said, Chante Chikala. I said, yes. She said, thank you for the ditch. I said, you would have gotten yourself out eventually. She said, probably, but I didn't have to. I turned and looked at her. She was looking back at me. That clear, direct look, the one that didn't ask anything and didn't hide anything. I said, you're welcome. 2 days later, there was trouble. It had been building for a while. There were men at the fort, 2 of them, brothers named Rourke, men who had been in the territory longer than they should have been without doing anything legal, who had been asking around about a woman from a wagon train. They'd heard there were survivors. They'd heard the chief had them. The word they used for me was not chief, and I will not repeat it here. They came into the camp mid-morning with 2 other men I didn't know, and they were not under a flag of anything but their own presumption. They came on horses, and they did not get down off their horses, which is a thing you do when you want to tell someone you don't consider them worth the effort of dismounting for. I was at the center of camp. I stayed where I was. The older Rourke, heavyset, with a beard that was doing more work than his face deserved, looked around until he found what he was looking for. Bridget had come out of Waste Wind's lodge and was standing maybe 20 feet to my left, and when his eyes landed on her, he got a particular look that I did not like. A proprietary look, like she was inventory. He said to me in English, "Those 2 belong to us." He said they were indebted to him, that her husband had taken a loan before he died, and that loan had not been settled and the boy was collateral. I said that's not how loans work. He said it is out here. I looked at him for a moment, then I looked at his 3 companions. None of them were comfortable. One of them, the youngest, was not looking at me at all, which meant he'd heard enough about me to not want to make eye contact, which told me something useful about where the nerve in this group actually lived. I said you rode into my camp to tell me that a woman I pulled out of a tornado ditch owes you money, and you'd like me to hand her and the boy over so you can collect a debt that I have only your word exists. He said that's right. I said no. He said I've got 4 men. I said you've got 4 men on horses in the middle of 40 of my people, some of whom are behind you and some of whom are not particularly in a mood to discuss their feelings about strangers who ride in without permission and make claims on people under my protection. He looked around. He hadn't noticed coming in. People tend not to notice the things they're not looking for, and he'd been looking for Bridget. There was a long moment. I said take your men and go back to your fort. I said if this woman owes you money she'll tell me so herself and we'll address it properly. I said come back the way you came, and I will not follow you, and we will all have a better winter than we would otherwise. The younger Rourke behind him touched his brother's arm, said something low. The heavy-set one kept looking at me. I could see him counting. I could see him doing the arithmetic that men like him do when they're deciding whether their courage is worth the cost. It wasn't. He turned his horse. He didn't say anything. They rode out, and I watched them go until I couldn't see them anymore, and then I stood there a moment longer after that. Bridget came up beside me. She said, "Did he tell you what he said he told you?" I said yes. She said it's a lie. She said her husband had borrowed $40 4 years ago and paid it back inside 6 months, and there was a receipt somewhere in the wreckage of the wagon, not that it mattered now. I said I know it was a lie. She said how? I said because a man who has a legitimate debt doesn't come collect it by riding into someone's camp and not getting off his horse. She was quiet, then she said what happens now. I said now, I send word to 2 men I know at the fort who are not Rourkes, and I make it plain that those women and that boy are under my protection, and anyone who interferes with that should be prepared for me to take a personal interest in their affairs. She said you'd do that. I said I already am. She looked at me, that look again, but different this time, something working in it that hadn't been there before. A recalculation. The way a person looks when they've been carrying an assumption about something and they've just had to put it down. She said, I'll repay you. Whatever this costs in trouble or in favor, I will repay it. I said, that's not what this is. She said, what is it then? I said, you're under my protection. That has no price. That's just what it is. The look on her face, I don't know a word for it. I've thought about a word for it many times since. The closest I have is relief, but not the relief of someone who's been afraid and is now safe. The relief of someone who has been carrying everything themselves for so long that they'd stopped noticing the weight, and then something takes one piece of it, just one, and suddenly they can feel how heavy the rest is. Her eyes were bright. She didn't cry. She was not a woman who cried easily, and she was not going to start in the middle of camp. But her eyes were bright, and she put her hand on my arm just for a moment, just her fingers closing around my forearm where the sleeve was rolled back, and she looked at me straight on. She said, "Thank you." And then she took her hand back, and she walked back toward the lodge. The fort situation resolved the way these things resolve when the power is clear. The Rourke brothers made noise for a while, and then made less noise, and then made none at all, which usually means they'd found a simpler target somewhere. I sent a man to watch the road for 2 weeks. Nothing came of it. Her shoulder finished healing. Cormac refused to leave, which Bridget fought him on and then stopped fighting, which I think was also her not leaving. She found work in the camp, things she was genuinely useful for. She had some knowledge of plant medicine, not our medicine, different plants, different uses. And she and Waste Wind spent long sessions comparing what they knew, pointing at things and naming them in 2 languages and sometimes arguing. Waste Wind did not argue with people she did not respect. I considered that meaningful. One evening in late autumn, the first cold coming down from the north, the kind of cold that smells like iron and tells you to lay in more wood, she came to the lodge and sat across the fire from me. Properly across, the way you sit to say something. She said, "I need to tell you something." I said, "All right." She said, "I've been thinking about the wagon, about what I was going to do when I got west." She said I was going to take that money and some knowledge I have of seeds and soil, and I was going to find a piece of ground and work it. She said that was the plan. I said was. She said is. She looked at me. She said the question is where. I said people move around a lot in this country. Some west, some less west than they thought they'd be. She said some considerably less west. I said yes. She said, "What do you need for the spring? Your people." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I know something about soil. I know something about what grows and what doesn't." She said the agency's been promising seed that doesn't come or comes wrong, and she'd heard enough about that from Waste Wind. She said, "If I'm going to be here," she stopped. I said, "If you're going to be here." She said, "You haven't asked me to be." I looked at her across the fire. The flame between us, the smoke going up through the hole in the top of the lodge, the night sounds outside, a horse somewhere, the wind against the hides. I said, "Bridget." She said, "Yes." I said, "I would like you to stay." She held the look for a moment, 2, 3. Then she nodded, a single nod, the way she decided things, without fanfare, without performance, final. She said, "All right." We sat across from each other in the warmth of that fire for a long time that evening. The camp settled around us. The wind came up and ran along the hides of the lodge. Somewhere Cormac was laughing again, that helpless tumbling laugh, and old Shungmanidu Thanka was either scolding him or encouraging him. It was hard to tell with that man. She moved around the fire at some point, not with ceremony. She just came and sat next to me, the way she had that first time, 3 feet away and then slightly less, and she did not take her eyes from the fire. I did not either. But her shoulder, the mended one, the one I had set in the cold water of that ditch, was against my arm, just barely, just enough. That was how it started. I will tell you this about the winter that followed. It was hard. The cold that came in November was worse than anyone had said it would be, and there were 3 weeks in January when we ran short on firewood, and I spent those weeks doing what a chief does, which is manage and decide and hold things together while trying not to show how close the edge is. Bridget helped. She helped in ways I did not ask her to help in, ways I did not know to ask. She knew things about stretching provisions, about which small fires were more efficient than large ones, about which members of the camp needed the most protection from the cold and which could make do. She had her mother's knowledge, she told me once. Hard knowledge, famine knowledge. The kind of knowledge you learn when you are a people who have been pushed to the edge and had to get clever about the edge. I understood that kind of knowledge. There were hard conversations that winter. There were nights I came to her with things I had nowhere else to put, decisions I'd made that I wasn't sure of, pressure from the agency, a young man in the camp who was being pulled toward anger that I could not entirely blame him for and could not entirely allow. She listened to all of it. She didn't pretend to have answers she didn't have. But she listened with her whole attention, that complete stillness of hers, and sometimes that was the thing. She said once, "You carry all of them." I said yes. She said, "Who carries you?" I looked at her. She was looking back. No softness in it, no sentiment. Just the question asked straight, waiting for a straight answer. I said, "You do, some." She said, "Some isn't enough." She said, "I can do better than some." I said, "I know." She moved across the space between us and put both arms around me and put her head against my neck. I could feel her breath, the warmth of her, the solidity of her. A real, whole, alive person who had been in a ditch in 4 inches of water 4 months ago and was here now, intact, by some arrangement of the world that I did not entirely understand. I put my arms around her. Outside the wind was up and the cold was doing what cold does in January, which is remind you that it is indifferent to you, that it will be here when you are not, that warmth is something you make or you do not have. We had it. Come spring she planted things. She had gotten seeds from somewhere. I did not ask all the details. She had arrangements I was not always party to, and she planted in a ground that had not been cultivated before. A south-facing slope with good runoff that she had looked at all winter with the eye of a woman who knows soil. Things grew. Not everything, not at first. Some of what she planted failed, and she looked at it without self-pity and made adjustments and tried again. Some of what she planted did things none of us expected. Cormac worked beside her. He was not a farmer by instinct, but he was a boy who did not know how to refuse effort when effort was being asked. And by summer, he was as brown as any child in the camp, and could move through a conversation in Lakota without losing the thread. And old Shungmanidu Thanka had stopped treating him like a student, and started treating him like an assistant, which in that man's reckoning was a considerable elevation. The agency sent an inspector that summer, a man in a coat that had not been designed for this country, with a hat that the wind was going to end up with eventually. He came to look at how the provisions were being managed, which was a way of looking at me. Men like that came through sometimes. They were assessing whether I was sufficiently manageable, is the word, I suppose. Whether I was the kind of chief who would make their jobs easy. He met Bridget. I watched him try to figure out what she was. His categories didn't have a slot for her, and I could see him working through it. White woman. Not a prisoner, clearly not. She was directing 2 young men in the planting with a fluency that was not the fluency of someone being managed. Not a missionary. Not a treaty wife, whatever he thought that meant. He said to me in that careful official way, "And this woman is." I said, "She's my wife." She was standing maybe 30 feet away, and she heard me say it. She turned and looked at me, and I looked at her. She had dirt on her hands up to the wrist. Her hair was up, but the wind had made its own plans for it. She had a smear of something on her cheek. She was standing in the ground she had made grow, in the camp that was my people's camp, under a sky that was our sky, and she was looking at me with those clear gray eyes, and in them was something I had seen building for a long time and had not let myself name. She said, loud enough to carry, "That's right." The inspector wrote something in his book. I did not particularly care what he wrote. What I cared about was this, the look on her face after he'd gone, when it was just the 2 of us at the end of the day with the light going long and gold across the planted ground, and the smell of turned earth in the air. She came and stood beside me and looked at what she'd made grow, and I stood beside her and looked at it too. She said you could have warned me, you were going to say that. I said I could have. She said, is it true? I said I would like it to be. She was quiet for a moment. The light was going, the sky doing that thing it does in late summer evenings, that deep blue going into violet, going into something that doesn't have a name. A hawk somewhere, very high, making a long lazy circle above the valley. She took my hand, not dramatically, just reached out and took it, her work-rough fingers closing around mine, and held on. She said, it's true then. I said, all right. I have been a chief since I was 26 years old. I have made decisions that kept people alive, and decisions I have had to live with, and decisions I still turn over in the night when sleep won't come. I have lost a first wife, and held a people together through losses I will not list because the list is too long, and this is not a story about loss. I have sat in rooms with men who wanted to diminish what I am, and I have sat in those rooms, and I have been what I am regardless. None of that left me. It is all still there, all of it, the weight and the years and the gray that has come into my hair since then. Being loved does not remove what you carry. It does not rewrite what you have survived. It does not make you different. But there is something in being known by a person who sees you clearly, who has seen you in the middle of a hard winter and a harder decision, and a room full of people looking to you to be unshakable, and who is still there, who stays, not because she has to, not because there's nowhere else to go, because she looked at everything that is present in this man and she made her choice. That is the thing I could not have told you I needed until I had it. We married that autumn, not with ceremony from either world, because the ceremony from her world would not have been official in the eyes of the people who would have made trouble about it, and because what we had was already something that ceremony would have been only catching up to. We married in the way of people who have already decided. She moved her things into my lodge, and Cormac slept in old Shungmanidu Thanka's lodge, which the old man would never admit to being pleased about but was. That was many years ago now. She is outside right now. I can hear her. She is arguing with Cormac about the best way to repair the fence along the east pasture, and Cormac is 23 now and has opinions, and she has been having opinions since before he was born. So this argument is going to take a while and will probably end with them both doing it her way, which is how these things generally end. I am sitting here with the morning coming through the window, which is glass now, real glass, a window she decided we needed, and proceeded to acquire with the particular unstoppability that she brings to things she has decided. The light is doing something particular to the floor. A low, slant, autumn light, the kind that makes old wood look like it was always that color. I think about the ditch sometimes. The red clay walls of it, the cold water, the sound of the sky returning to itself after the damage it had done. I think about lifting her out of that water and not knowing who she was or what she would become in my life. I think about the weight of her, which was not much, and the breathing, which was stubborn, and the fact that she was not dead. I have pulled people from difficulty before and since. It is a thing that comes with what I am. But I have not always been the one who needed pulling back, and I have not always had a person who knew how to do that quietly, without making you feel pulled, in such a way that you don't notice it happening until you are already on solid ground. She did that for me. I do not know that she knows the full extent of it. The argument outside has resolved. I can tell by the silence, and then by the sound of the fence post going in, Cormac's doing, and her telling him he's at the wrong angle, which is followed by the pause of a young man deciding whether to argue, and the sound of the post being adjusted. In a little while she'll come inside. She'll have dirt on her hands again. She'll wash them in the basin and dry them on the cloth by the window, and she'll come and sit at the table with me and have her coffee, which she requires in the morning with an intensity that I have long since stopped questioning, and she'll look out the window at the morning, at the sky we share. She'll look at me, and I will be as I am every morning, exactly what I am, the man she chose, the man she stayed for. The rock she leaned against until the leaning went both ways, until the word for what we are to each other is just the word for something that holds. The light is on the floor. The coffee is on the stove. Outside, my fence is being repaired by my nephew, who is my son, and my wife is telling him how to do it right. I am this morning and every morning a man who has enough.